All right, today we're tackling a really complex and honestly, a pretty misunderstood part of history. We're doing an explainer on Adolf Hitler's extensive drug use. So let's just get right to it with a big, provocative question. Was he a junkie? I mean, it's a shocking word to use, but people have been asking it for decades. Was he an addict in the way we think of one today? Well, to get to the truth, we have to cut through a lot of myths and look directly at the evidence. And you know what's crazy? Almost all of that evidence comes from one single incredible source. This super detailed private medical journals of his personal doctor, a guy named Theodore Morell. Seriously, these notes give us this unbelievable window into Hitler's health and the absolutely shocking cocktail of drugs he was being given. Now, you might be surprised to hear that this whole story doesn't start with hard drugs. Not at all. It actually begins much earlier, back in the 1930s, with a pattern of treatment that really, it just set the stage for everything that was about to happen. So before the war even starts, Hitler's got this long list of chronic health problems. He was dealing with really bad digestive issues, severe stomach cramps, skin conditions, he couldn't sleep. On top of all that, he had major anxiety and was a notorious hypochondriac. He was looking for a doctor who could give him immediate relief, and he absolutely found that in Dr. Morell. And what was Morell's go-to solution? Injections. He was giving Hitler daily shots of vitamins, glucose, and even some pretty bizarre stuff like extracts from animal organs. Now, these so-called tonics weren't necessarily dangerous on their own, but here's the crucial part. They created a powerful psychological pattern. Hitler started to believe he needed an injection just to feel normal, just to get through the day. And that brings us to cocaine, which, believe it or not, was a legitimate medical treatment in Europe back then. It would be prescribed in eye drops for things like sinus pain, and Hitler got it repeatedly. And even though these were medical doses, the effects were undeniable. You get a huge boost in your mood, your confidence, your energy. So as Germany marches into war, the kinds of treatments Hitler was getting escalated dramatically. And that's because a much, much more powerful substance entered the picture. Meet Pervitin. That was the German brand name for methamphetamine. And here is the truly wild part. In Nazi Germany, you could just buy it over the counter. No prescription needed. It was sold as a kind of miracle pill for fighting fatigue, and they gave millions of them to soldiers to fuel the Blitzkrieg, their lightning war campaigns. Now, the effects of meth are intense, and they are really destabilizing. On one hand, you get this feeling of euphoria, this incredible focus, but on the other hand, it leads to aggression, paranoia, and your judgment just goes completely out the window. And according to Dr. Morell's own records, Hitler started using Pervitin regularly around 1941, which just so happens to be when the tide of the war started turning against Germany. Okay, and we have to be crystal clear here because this is important. As respected historians like Peter Longerich and Ian Kershaw point out, the meth didn't create his ideology. That was already there. But, and this is a huge but, they all agree that using it constantly almost certainly amplified his worst personality traits. It made him more rigid in his thinking, way more paranoid, and much more emotionally unstable. The next turning point in this story is a huge one. The failed assassination attempt in July 1944 didn't just injure Hitler physically, it pushed him over a brand new chemical threshold. The bomb blast at his Wolf's Lair headquarters left him with punctured eardrums. He was covered in splinters, and he was in a ton of pain. To deal with all of that, Dr. Morell introduced a new and far more addictive drug into the mix. That drug was Eucadol. Today, we know it as oxycodone. Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful and highly addictive opioid. And this right here, this is the moment most medical historians believe Hitler officially crossed the line from just using drugs regularly into a clear physical dependence. And the proof for that dependence is pretty compelling. At one point, the war was disrupting supply lines, so Morell's stock of Eucadol started running low. Eyewitnesses in the bunker reported that Hitler started showing all the classic signs of opioid withdrawal: shaking, sweating, extreme irritability. He was physically addicted. So now we're in the final year of the war. As the Third Reich is crumbling, Hitler's personal drug regimen just descends into absolute, total chaos. You know, there's actually a medical term for what was happening. It's called polypharmacy. It just means using a bunch of different interacting drugs all at the same time. And this is so dangerous because the drugs can make each other stronger, they can cancel each other out, or they can have completely unpredictable effects on your body and your mind. And this list, this just illustrates the chaos perfectly. By 1945, he's on a daily cocktail of uppers like meth, painkillers like opioids, and then he's taking downers like barbiturates and sedatives to counteract all the other drugs. It was this insane chemical roller coaster designed just to keep him functional, but you have to imagine how profoundly destabilizing it was. So let's just quickly recap this whole downward spiral. It starts in the 30s with just a reliance on getting injections. Then it escalates in 1941 to methamphetamine as the war starts going badly. The bomb plot in 44 is what leads to the full-blown opioid dependence. And it all ends up in this state of total chaotic polypharmacy during those final desperate days in the bunker.
Now, with a story this sensational, it's so important that we really separate the myths from what the actual evidence supports.
So the biggest myth out there is that the drugs are what made him evil. But the evidence is clear. His anti-Semitism, his authoritarianism, all of that was cemented in his mind decades before his heavy drug use even started. The drugs didn't invent his worldview. They just amplified his existing paranoia, his rigidity, and his complete detachment from the consequences of his actions. This right here is the conclusion that the evidence overwhelmingly supports. It avoids all the sensationalism and just sticks to the facts, the stuff that's documented in Morell's records and was observed by the people around him. He wasn't simply high. He was a medically compromised man who was dependent on a cocktail of drugs that was just eroding his connection to the real world. And that really leaves us with one final lingering question. Knowing that the man making the final suicidal military decisions for an entire nation was in this profound state of chemical dependence, how does that reshape our understanding of the final catastrophic chapter of the Second World War?